Okay, a lot of you guys have been asking for this video, which is going to be a priority tier list for the memories. Now, I have decided to keep this video just to the SP memories, and there's three reasons for this, okay? Number one, all of the UR and the SSR memories, my views for them haven't changed at all, so you can still refer to my video from like a couple months back if you really care about the UR and also SSR memories. Whereas for some of the SP memory, my views have actually changed, so I kind of want to update this video just for them. Second reason is that pretty much all of the UR memory are now being power crept by SP memory in one way or another, so there isn't really too much value for something for even more UR memories. Okay, even if you want some of the more universal UR memories, there's now kind of more or less an equivalent universal SP memory already. Okay, and then the last reason, and probably the most important reason, is because SP memories and UR memories very hard to differentiate between the two because they all wear the exact same clothing, even though SP characters are supposed to be look cool, but they all wear the same school uniform. Okay, so that's kind of why I don't want to confuse myself, and I'm just going to keep it to only SP memories for the time being. Okay, so how have I done this tier list? Obviously, tier list is going to be completely subjective, so take this video however you want. But I have done three different tiers. Top tier is going to be, top two tier are both going to be S tier. However, I'll separate them out based on whether or not a memory can be universally used on multiple characters, or whether or not you need the on specific character or specific team building in order for it to work. Okay, but either way, if you play it correctly, they are both very, very strong memories, and that's kind of the S tier. And then the last row is going to be A tier. I'll put three memories here, which in my view, first of all, they're not even that great. But second of all, I can pretty much always find a better alternative out of the remaining SP characters, SP memories. So that's kind of why I just classified them as being power crap already. Okay. So starting off the top, also all of this, they are sorted by positions. Okay, just so it's easy for me to compare. So starting off, we have the liberal memory, and the first one's going to be communist one. I mean, just straight up, if you compare communist memory versus Nishinoya's memory, which require lots of other conditions to trigger its effect, it's going to be quite obvious why communist one is going to be the far more universal one out of the two. Now, having said that, the last part of its effect, to be honest, is not actually that universal because it does require the buff only works for your spikers who happen to receive and spike in the same turn. However, if you ignore that part, just the first half is already good enough and very universal. Okay, so that's kind of why it's on top of the list. Then we move on to the setter memory, and I basically pick one which is the best defensive setter memory in my opinion, and one which is the best offensive one. So the best defensive one is going to be the one for SP Kenma. It basically has this gimmick which allows, it's essentially your team to do a critical receive or block every three actions. Now that's actually really, really crazy, which basically means, for example, if your team actually really need high reflex, then obviously this provides far more consistency because it has that guaranteed mechanic. And if your team doesn't actually require reflex, so imagine if your whole team is at zero reflex, then this memory essentially is going to give you a 33% buff in reflex stat for all of your whole team, right? So that they are able to do a critical out of every three receive or out of every three blocks, etc. So this is actually a massive memory. Highly, highly recommended. Now, the only thing with this memory is that it only buff up the defensive end. So if you actually want a setter memory, which is more for offensive end, it's going to be this one for Sugawara. Now, this is going to be one of the memory which I have changed my opinion since my last video. Previously, also was going to be, this memory was like super awkward because like the first half of condition requires your stamina to be high, but then the second half only triggers essentially on Sugawara because they actually require you to consume stamina. And if you actually play Sugawara, you're going to immediately cut the entire team stamina by half at the start of the match, which then makes it really awkward to trigger the first half of the memory effect. Okay, so that's kind of why initially I thought this is like a super awkward and super weird memory. But what made my mind change completely is the fact that they have added the bench effect for SP economy, which basically restore huge amount of stamina even when SP economy is on the bench. And SP economy, to be honest, is almost going to be a staple, right? I'm going to recommend every single person to get SP economy to get skill resistance 2 just for that passive bench stamina effect. And as soon as that is in, then all of a sudden you're actually now able to consistently trigger the first half of Sugawara memory effect, because that can basically, I can't remember what's the actual number now, but I just know that you kind of need 90 stamina or more in order to get the full buff, and with SP economy, that is going to be the case for a lot longer in a match, and that's kind of why this is actually going to be super good. Also, if you really care about chasing high numbers in club contests, this is probably also going to be the best setter memory for that, because it provides the best offensive buff. Okay, so those are going to be the two most universal ones for the setter position. Then moving on to the mid blockers, I put three out here, which is going to be Ione, Kuro, and also Suki. Ione's one is another one that as my rating for it has been different since the last time, because previously when I was reading the effect for the Ione's memory, it said loads of things. For example, you have to do like a multi-block, etc., which I assume you need to have other people in the front row with also blocking skill. Now, someone actually commented in my last video saying that on Taiwan server, so it's a Taiwan player, I believe. Apparently, that kind of just works as long as someone else jump at the same time. If that's actually going to be the case, then essentially this effect is actually going to be super universal, because you can pretty much trigger it like 90% of the time. Okay, so that's kind of why my rating for it has changed. This might still need to be tested, because I just want to make sure that it's actually going to be the case. But right now, I'm going to assume that Taiwan player already tested it out, and in which case, Iona's memory is just going to activate as soon as another person jump alongside. So basically, you need to have at least two people jump at the same time to block. That's going to happen literally 90% of the time in a match. Okay, so this is now very, very good, and also very universal, because it's very easy to trigger. Um, then the next memory is going to be the one for SP Crow. This one does have a bit of a trigger condition, which is requiring you to have the opponent have debuff. However, the same with debuff is that if you actually look at all of the meta team, if you play a quick spiking team, Hinata is able to do debuff. If you do a receive specialty team, Kenma is able to do debuff. If you do a block specialty team, Kuro and Suki are able to do debuff. And even if you do a power spiking team, Yushijima can actually do a tiny bit of a debuff if the enemy, the one who's receiving, is actually a different person. And also SPO Okawa can also do a bit of a debuff, assuming the person spiking is actually the one diagonally opposite him. So as a result, even though this is conditional on the enemy having a debuff, as you can see, out of all of the meta teams, they are all able to land debuff pretty easily and also pretty consistently, and that's kind of why I'm also going to rate this one pretty universal. The next up, we have the one for Suki's memory. Suki's memory is actually the one which is able to improve both quick spiking stats and also blocking stats at the same time. Now, you might be wondering, vast majority of mid blockers, predominantly you just want that blocking stats, in which case Suki's one is not going to be quite as good as the others, and that is fair. But in all honesty, Suki's one is able to provide 18% buff to the block stats as well. 18% buff is not bad by any chance. Like, that is actually really, really decent if you compare to some of the other memory. So that's kind of why, even though this one has been more tailored or more balanced towards trying to buff up both quick spiking and blocking at the same time, even if I just look at one singular stat, the buff itself is still pretty decent. So that's kind of why I'm actually also going to put this on the universal one, because let's say if you only have resources to go just one memory for mid blockers, at least getting this one makes it valuable in the sense that no matter what you block, you want to build your mid blocker in terms of spiking or in terms of blocking, this memory is going to be universally good for both roles. Okay, so that's kind of why this one also has my vote in terms of the universal. The next one is going to be the Ginchimas one. Now, this one is nice in the sense that it has a bit of a passive buff. Well, not passive, but it does have a bit of a support ability, so that even if you don't place it on your main spiking, wind spiker, it can still benefit from it. Basically, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's like when he actually scores the spike, well, whoever is actually equipping this memory scores the spike, you're going to get a 2% increase to base stats to your whole team. It's not a massive number, and it's conditional on the fact that you are able to score, but it's the only Wind Spiker SP memory which is able to provide a supporting effect to the whole team. So that's kind of why I also classify it as universal. Then the next one is going to be the most universal opposite hitter memory, for which is one for Kunami. To be honest, if it's not down to position restriction, I actually think this is probably the best offensive spiking memory, purely because the effect this memory is able to buff include both crit damage and also attack technique and also power spiking. So literally one single memory is able to span across all three different multiplier, which makes this memory insanely good when you actually do the apply the damage multiplication together. Okay, so that's kind of why this is going to be the best opposite hitter memory, and as a result, it's going to be universal, right? Because the main opposite hitter you want is going to be Yujijima and Konami. Okay, then next one is gonna be next tier. It's gonna be the ones which are still very good, but just a bit more specific. So you can only play them on certain characters. Okay. First up, we have the one for Nishinoya. This actually require you to be able to spam ult at least twice in single turn. So obviously very specific because Nishinoya is the only one who is able to do that. Then the next one we have Orikawa. This one requires attack tempo, which pretty much just means you have to have either equipping this memory on Orikawa himself, or you also need Orikawa on the team. Okay, so that's why it's also specific. Then the one for Asumia requires this trigger condition where the enemy's awareness need to be below a certain threshold. So once again, you need very specific team building in order for this to fully shine. Then the next one for Kokonagawa. This one is actually a really, really good memory in terms of its passive, in terms of the additional effects able to trigger. So, for example, I think it's like as long as your team serve, you're able to give defense tech buff to your entire front row. So that half, so the second half is actually very universal. The only annoying thing is that the main passive stats this one actually boosts is blocking stats, which basically means it's only going to be good for himself. Because even the other block specialist setter, for example, Sugawara, normally you still build Sugawara with a setting stat rather than blocking stats, okay? So that's kind of why the main stats for this is just unfortunately so tailored that makes it only good for Kokonagawa. Next one is going to be the one for Akashi. Half of its effect is literally tied with Bokuto, okay? So that's kind of why it's also very specific. Then we have Osamu Miya. He is the only opposite hitter who does quick spike, so you kind of need his memory for himself, okay? Then we have the one for the new SP Hoshiyumi. This one basically requires your character to be able to frequently switch between two different types of skills. So it can be, for example, receive and also spiking, or block and spiking, or maybe even surf and spiking. But obviously, surf you can only do it in one rotation, so it's not going to be that much achievable. But because you need to frequently switch between two different skills, that's kind of why it's very specific to your characters who are able to do that. And even out of all of the characters who are able to have multiple skills, receive and spike, they're not the, I mean, they can be a good combo, but you can't always choose who will be the one receiving. So it's not actually as consistent to switch around. The easiest way to actually switch around between your skills is always going to be a blocking skill and a spiking skill, because those are the two actions you can actually choose which character perform. So as a result of that, pretty much this is just tailored towards a UR and SP version of Hoshimi as well. Okay. Then the next one we have is going to be the one for SP Bokuto. Originally, I also didn't rate this memory too highly, purely because it requires a condition where the one person spiking needs to have Team Morale Awakening at least 6 touches more. But then I realized the buff it's able to give is massive as an attack technique, which is one of the best stats in this game. So that's kind of why I bump it up to S tier. However, even with that massive buff, I still think it's only going to be good for SP Bokuto himself, because for all of the other characters, a lot of time you don't really have that luxury of choosing when to spike, because a lot of time what tend to happen is that you only have 3 spikers on your team, and therefore you have to make sure each of your spikers spike in turn. There isn't really too much luxury where you can just decide to, oh, you know what, I'll just save this spike for later, because if you do that, you basically don't have to end up spiking with a normal spike rather than ultimate attack. So that's kind of why vast majority of the time you don't really have that luxury of just parking a spike for later. Whereas SP Bokuto can literally only use his ultimate attack during Team Morale Awakening, and therefore can actually guarantee to trigger this condition of his memory. Okay, so that's kind of why I feel like this memory is only going to be good for himself. Then the next one is going to be for SP Iwazumi. The status buff is receiving, okay? So that's kind of quite obvious why he is only going to be the one that's actually able to use it, because all of the other wind spiker, they're predominantly spiking focus, whereas Iwazumi is the only one which is mainly on receiving. Okay, and then lastly we have SP Hinata. Vast majority of mid blocker in this game tend to be used for blocking. The only one doing quick spiking is going to be just SP Hinata and also Suki. Suki probably prefer his own memory a bit more, and that basically means by elimination, this memory is only going to be good for Hinata himself. Okay, so that's kind of why this is also going to be in specific but S tier. Then lastly, the three memory which I think are have been power grab. First one is going to be Sakusa. Sakusa's memory is always going to be awkward because similar to the rationale for SP Bokuto, the thing is that you kind of need him to spike as soon as he receive. But vast majority of the time, when you only have three spikers to rotate around, you don't have that luxury of just holding on to his spike till he receive. Okay, because vast majority of the time you only have one person capable of using a spiking skill at one time, and it's going to be completely down to luck whether or not Sakusa just happened to receive on the exact same turn he should be spiking. Okay, so that's kind of why I am personally not a great fan of this memory. Furthermore, this memory have now actually been a power grab by Hoshiyumi's memory to some extent, because Hoshiyumi's memory also require you to switch between skills, so basically in this case, receive and also spiking. But at least Hoshiyumi's one doesn't have this fixed criteria where you have to receive and spike in the same turn. It just requires you to change up your skill. So what you can actually do is you can receive this turn and then spike next turn, and you still benefit from it. Obviously, the buff is not quite as big as Sakusa, but for me, that's a lot more consistent, and that's kind of why I feel like, first of all, Sakusa's memory is not even that good. Second of all, it's now actually been power crept by Hoshiyumi's memory if you do really want to play on him. Okay. Then next up we have Yushijima's one. This one I just feel like it's just completely been power crept by the one from Konami, purely because it's just not able to offer as much buff as what Konami's one is able to do. The only benefit this one is able to provide is that it's actually able to give a huge amount of awareness buff at the start of a match, which then eventually will diminish. But the thing is, SP Konami, SP, Yushijima, all of them, those opposite hitter, they kind of need awareness. They already have like huge amount of built-in awareness already, and a lot of time you will be playing them with SP or Okawa, who also give huge amount of awareness. So I don't even think that awareness buff is going to be that important for them. And if you ignore the awareness part, then this is just going to be completely power crap by SP Kunami's memory. Okay. Then the last one we have is going to be Tendo's one. Tendo's one is also a bit of like a balanced mid block memory, which buff a bit of a block and also a bit of a quick spiking. So the closest competition it's going to have is going to be against Suki's one. Now the buff is able to provide in terms of quick spiking and also blocking is not quite as high as what Suki is able to do. I think it's able to also buff up defense technique. So maybe if you take that into consideration, it's going to be on par with what Suki is able to do in terms of blocking, but definitely lower in terms of spiking. Now, the only benefit Tendo's one is able to give additional over what Suki's one is able to give is going to be awareness. However, personally, vast majority of mid blockers don't actually need awareness. The only one who do need awareness is going to be Tendo himself, and also Suki, and also Hinata. Now, Suki and Hinata already have huge amount. Well, I mean, Suki already have a huge amount of built-in awareness buff mechanism, so he doesn't really need that extra awareness. Hinata would just convert that awareness anyway, so he doesn't need extra awareness. And then Tendo himself, normally you either play Tendo with SP or Kawa in that kind of like cultural festival formation, in which case SP Okawa is already going to give huge amount of awareness, so he doesn't need awareness. Or the alternative is that you'd be playing him with Asumu Mia and the Mia twins, in which case awareness would just be converted. Well, actually, no, awareness wouldn't even be converted to anything. It would just be reduced to 0 straight up. And in which case, there's no benefit of that extra awareness stats in his memory item. So that's kind of what I just found. This memory is not even that good for Tendo himself if you consider the typical teams he's normally played in. Okay, so that's kind of why I'm also going to place this in A tier. Okay, so that's going to be my view for all of the upcoming SP memories. Let me know what you guys think,